Right. Buenas tardes. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the North Public Library Board of Trustees, the North Public Library's first Latina Director, Ingrid Betancourt, and the NJHRC, welcome to the North Public Library. My name is Yesenia Lopez, and I am the Director of the New Jersey Hispanic Research and Information Center here at the North Public Library. The NJHRIC is a really long title, so I'm just going to say NJHRIC, HRIC. I'm referring to the same thing. And it consists of the Sala Hispanoamericana, which is the oldest component of the HRIC. And it is a Spanish language library located on the first floor of the library, designed to assist the Spanish dominant patrons. It consists of a Spanish language book collection, Spanish language configured computers, and of course our beautiful bilingual staff. There to answer any questions our Spanish dominant patrons have. And it also consists of one of the largest Spanish language book collections of any public library in the state of New Jersey. So that is the Sala Hispanoamericana, and it is the oldest component as it was established in 1989. The HRIC also consists of the Hispanic Reference Collection, which consists of a bilingual level research level collection of books on different Latino communities throughout New Jersey. The backbone of that collection is our Latino Oral History collection, which consists of live interviews with various Latino community leaders throughout New Jersey. It also consists of a local newspaper collection that consists of different newspapers established by and for the Latino communities throughout New Jersey. And the third component of the HRIC is the Puerto Rican Community Archive. That archive is a space where Puerto Rican communities get to donate their materials reflective of their lives and history here in New Jersey. And what that means is I reached out to different Latino community leaders, Puerto Rican organizations, and leaders throughout New Jersey to see if they would be willing to donate materials to this archive. Materials are things such as photographs, flyers, letters, brochures, and so on, reflective of our daily lives, and all housed in the Puerto Rican Community Archive. Now, also responsible for Latino programming here at the North Public Library. For example, I actually am coordinating 3 more book presentations scheduled this fall. So please get your pens and pencils out and mark your calendars, or your phones, of course. And mark your calendars. We have coming up next is October 29th, which is a book signing and author presentation of the new book, The Borinqueneers, A Visual History of the 65th Infantry Regiment. Please stay tuned and come back on October 29th, where we are going to have our authors signing copies of the book. And if you haven't already, make sure you get to watch the documentary that the author put together called The Borinqueneers. On November 5th, we're going to have una presentación musical con el autor del libro El Merengue, Historia y Secretos, escrito por Rolando Hernández Martínez. And then on November 19th, we have a discussion with the editors of Revolution Around the Corner, Voices from the Puerto Rican Socialist Party in the U.S. by Jose Velasquez, Carmen Rivera, and Andre Torres. So stay tuned for sure to our website, to our social media, so you get updates on these programs and more. At the North Public Library, we're programming all the time. We actually have another program going on in the library as we speak. But today we're here to tour this year's Latino Celebration exhibit titled Latino Champions, Empowering Communities Through Sports. It is co-curated by our archival assistant, Ella Laumbach, who is here with us, and myself, with help from Huber Ayala and Vanessa Castaldo. We based this year's theme in honor of the 50th anniversary of the death of Roberto Clemente. My room is very full, but if anyone in the room or on the line could tell us who they know, if they know who Roberto Clemente was. You can cheat, use your phones if you need to, but Roberto Clemente has school buildings, street names. Say it again. All over the place, exactly. So who was this guy? Paid for the Pirates, exactly. Thank you, Eric. Yes, Roberto Clemente was the first Puerto Rican baseball player admitted to the Major League Baseball. Played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Was the first um, Latino inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And a great humanitarian who actually lost his life, like I mentioned, 50 years ago in December while he passed away in a plane crash that was on his way to Nicaragua earthquake that was bringing them aid. And so, in honor of Roberto Clemente, we decided to exhibit and highlight Latino athletes in this year's theme. And throughout the exhibit, in addition to Roberto Clemente, we're going to see highlights that ways in which Latino champions empower communities in sports. Keeping in mind, of course, that in addition to athletes, the coaches who train and sometimes become like family and parent figures for athletes, the families who support by hosting fundraisers, carpooling to tournaments, paying for sports equipment and so on, as well as sport organizations who offer free or no cost sport programs and more are all considered champions. And these Latino champions empower our communities by breaking barriers through representation, offering social and financial support to athletes, and so on. So I'd like to give a special recognition. He is not here yet, but I just want to make sure and mention local community member who a lot of us know and admire. He is the one who said presente when we asked for photos and artifacts of local sports. He welcomed the Hoover and myself into his basement, which is actually more like a museum, and let us borrow many of the photographs and artifacts that you're going to see in the exhibit. So I'd like to make sure and thank Mr. Jose Lavos Santiago for his championship in helping us with the exhibit. So we'll all get to the tour of the exhibit after today's program or after today's discussion. But for today's program, Touchdown, Latino Champions in American Football with Dr. Mario Longorio and Dr. Jorge Eber, authors of Latinos in American Football, Pathbreakers on the Gridiron, 1927 to the present. Now, read off as I introduce our panelists. Jorge Eber was born in Havana, Cuba, and raised in the Little Havana neighborhood of Miami, Florida. He taught in the public schools of Miami-Dade County for 5 years before pursuing a PhD at the University of Utah. He currently serves as Associate Dean in the Student Division of the College of Arts and Sciences and Professor of History at Texas Tech University in Lubbock. His initial academic focus was on Mexican American history, but over the past 20 years, he shifted his research interests to examine the story of Mexican Americans, Latinos, and their participation or role in the history of U.S. sports. He is the co-author and co-editor of 17 books and numerous scholarly and encyclopedic articles, as well as more than 50 published scholarly book reviews. Mario Longorio was born in San Antonio, Texas, and graduated from John F. Kennedy High School in 1966. Wishing to avoid the draft, Mr. Longorio enlisted in the U.S. Navy. After several tours in Vietnam, South America, and the North Atlantic, Mr. Longorio was honorably discharged from the naval service in June of 1970. His military awards include Navy Meritorious Unit Commendation Ribbon, National Defense Medal, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal in Korea, the Vietnam Service Medal with 2 bronze stars, Korean Defense Service Medal, RVN Gallantry Cross with Palm Unit Citation Ribbon, and Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal with 1960 device. Mr. Longoria took advantage of the American GI Bill and the Hateful educational benefits, and in 2014, he received a Doctorate of Philosophy degree in English from the University of Texas in San Antonio. He is the author and co-author of 2 Latino sports histories, as well as numerous journal, newspaper stories, and articles. He's married to Noemi Reyes Longoria for 44 years and proud parents and grandparents of 4 children and 6 grandchildren. Welcome, Dr. Eber and Dr. Longoria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Yesenia, before you go, I wanted to hold this up. This is another one of my book, and there's your man right there, Roberto Clemente, right on the cover. Just thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you. Yes. So I am going to open the floor and let you guys discuss with us our book that we mentioned, Latinos in American Football.
Mario, why don't you get us going here?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. Yesenia, thank you very much for the introduction and and sharing it with the audience. I appreciate that. Jorge and I are very grateful to be here, first of all, and to address and speak about some information that's very dear to us in terms of researching our ancestry and also in the sports field. You know, the successes, the trials and tribulations that confront people of color on a daily basis as such. The book that Jorge and I had recently worked on, the Latinos in American Football, is actually I would have called it a work of art. You know, you're talking about maybe close to 40 years of research that went into gather all that information to put it all together, combine it, and give it an academic feel in terms of discrimination, racism, immigration, and just general life of people of color in the southwestern parts of the United States. Okay? For example, I know the book starts off with the mention of one Latino athlete who was quite gifted but did not receive the opportunity that is normally given to an athlete of that caliber and wound up playing in Canada his entire career, and does hold a record, a passing record that it far surpasses those that you hear or I should I say attained every season in the NFL. The term Latino versus Hispanic, you know, we address that also to some degree, and the acceptability of that term by the various ethnic groups in the country. Okay, Latino is probably the preferred one from my experience, because it comes or emanates from the Mexicanos or the Mexican Americans, Chicanos, or whatever they choose to call themselves. Does not really matter. It's what you have in your heart and what you do with whatever resources and abilities you have in your community, to use them properly and to use them for everyone's benefit. Mexicanos, like all Latinos, are basically collective thinkers. Before we decide to do anything, we always consider our family, our grandparents, and our community. That hasn't changed. In terms of as regards to the word Hispanic, which was actually coined during the Reagan administration by someone.
No, it's earlier than that. It starts in 70.
By the Census Bureau. But that term has more of a colonialist relationship than anything else. So we go from there. You know, education is very important. You know, the meanings we draw from the histories we write and how we write them and what we emphasize is for the overall collective mentality of the Latino or Hispanic, whichever you want to call yourself as such. The book contains 5 chapters and they're broken down chronologically. Some of the players there, the first one, era un cubano from the island, whose parents were in the elite of the Cuban in the Cuban government at the time. He wound up going to school at Cornell, became an exceptional football player, and was basically because they didn't have a draft back then in 1927. The professional football recruiters would actually hunt down and personally meet with the player and offer him a contract, which is exactly what happened. The At the time, he played one single year with a team called the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, who are today's Philadelphia Eagles. So forth. That's the beginning of the story of the Latino in professional football. Not only professional football, but collegiate football. He played at an Ivy League school in Cornell. At the same time that he was playing, that he was there, there was also a Mexicano, Emmanuel Soria from Mexico City, who was an All-American in 1932. He was from Mexico City and was also again came from an elite family in Mexico and attended Cornell University and achieved. He's the first Latino to achieve All-American status in the United States. You know, and from there the story just runs in different locations: the Southwest, the Midwest, the Florida and the Keys, and then up in the Midwest, the Chicago area, where there's a lot of heavy concentrations of Mexicanos or Latino populations as such. And athletics, in this case, football, is a journey for the athlete who has the abilities and also, and more importantly, the opportunity to play, you know, and be successful, and how that reflects on the community he's from.
Right.
It changes mindsets and so forth. You know, that's where we're at. Jorge, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think to build upon some of the points that Mario is making, and actually, let me just go back a little bit. Mario and I met many years ago now, because Mario published a book in 1997 on collegiate and professional Latino football players, both in the National Football League and some of the other professional leagues and in the Canadian League. And I got here to Texas and I started doing research on Mexican American athletes at the high school level. When I got here to Texas Tech 25 years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Laro Cavazos, who was the Mexican American president of the university. His younger brother, Bobby Cavazos, was a second team All-American for Texas Tech in 1953. And, you know, I started doing research on Bobby, and that led me to a little town in South Texas called Kingsville, which is near Corpus Christi. And I went down there, I did some research, and of course, you know, knowing what Mario had done and knowing sort of that football is, you cannot imagine that how people love football in the state of Texas. I know that you know, we love football in my home state of Florida, and I'm sure that you love football in New Jersey, but here in Texas, and Mario, I think, will agree with me, it is a religion. I mean, it is, especially here in West Texas. Friday nights, everything stops. Everything that matters is what's going on in the local football field. And so I said to myself, you know, if we've got Bobby Cavazos and we've got this story, there's bound to be others. So I began to do more and more research in that regard, and eventually I reconnected with Mario, and I said, well, look, your first book takes us through the merger of the National Football League and the American Football League, which is 1970. We got to bring this thing up to the present. So that's how we got together to put together this book. And, you know, as Mario said, the majority of what we do, what we write about, is here in Texas, New Mexico, California, a lot of stuff in the Midwest, and obviously also a lot of stuff that I was familiar with from my home state of Florida. I mean, there were a lot of Cubanos playing football in South Florida and in a few other parts of the state of Florida. So it's a really interesting story. And to build up on one more thing that Mario said, and really I guess Yesenia, to tie it to the point that you're trying to make with this with this discussion and with this presentation. If you look at the history of Latinos, if you look at that study, that story, for the longest time, especially with Mexican Americans, for example, which is the literature that I'm most familiar with, it's about labor, it's about community, it's about religion. And one of the things that I noticed was there's a lot of people playing baseball. There's a lot of people playing other sports. Sport is a part of la comunidad. So we need to begin that process of writing about it. So Mario had already done a lot of that groundwork, and I've been able to pick up and do some stuff at the high school level. And, it's blossomed into a whole bunch of books. And I can't tell you how proud I am to have worked with this gentleman who is really, the godfather of the study of Latinos in American football.
If I may, the example, the Donna High School, back in the early 1960s, okay, a 96% Latino Mexican American community, okay, and in Texas during that time was very segregated, okay? And also because it was segregated, oftentimes the schedules didn't, the schedule were not as full as say the regular ones, because some of the all white teams didn't want to play the Mexicans as such. Well, things kind of, in this case, it was a little different. Okay, that the team comprised primarily about 90% Mexican Americans with a few. I think there was one black, and there was maybe a few Anglos on it.
Yeah.
Won the state championship back in 1961. Okay. Came home very proud with the championship. And then you fast forward about 40 years, and that community is still talking about that success.
Yeah.
You talk about, it's already been about 3 generations and so forth, and how the kids that go to the Donna High School now, and when they talk amongst themselves or they get ready for the game that they're playing today or this coming Friday and so forth, will always bring up or mention that team.
And you know what? Yes, again, to sort of build on that idea, Yesenia, you mentioned Roberto Clemente.
Yep.
And what he means to Puerto Ricans. And look, I got to tell you something. I fell in love with Roberto Clemente. I am a long-suffering Pittsburgh Pirate fan. They stink. They have stunk for many, many decades. But Clemente was the guy that hooked me on the Pirates. And it was because when my family got to Miami in 1968, 1969, my dad was a great baseball player. My dad loved baseball. My dad got me hooked on baseball. Oh, and by the way, I got to say this for the folks in New Jersey. My dad taught me to hate the New York Yankees with every fiber of my being. And I tell my wife, who grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, that the only fault that she has, and we've been married almost 40 years, the only fault that she has is that she's a Yankee fan. But anyway, so I became a big fan of the Pirates and Roberto Clemente because of the fact that he was a fellow Latino. It meant something to me that there was someone who was of a similar background playing at the highest levels of professional sport and doing so successfully. And at the same time, again, to build on some of these themes that Mario's talked about and that you were talking about, what does that mean to a little Cubanito in Miami, or a little Mexican American kid in Kingsville, Texas, or San Antonio or Corpus Christi or Lubbock, it means that we belong. We are part of this country, and we can participate in academia, in religious life, in the unions, in business, and in sport. We can participate. We are part of this country. And I think that people like Clemente, people like the Donna Redskins, the team that Mario was mentioning, people like Carlos Alvarez, who was a Cuban American wide receiver, All American for the University of Florida in 1969, 1970. The fact that these people play the game that Americans love, they play it well, shows that we are as American as anybody else, and we belong here, and we are part of the fabric of this country. Our our lives, our businesses, our religious practices, our cultural practices, our music, and our sports. We're part of America. We're part of the United States.
And Roberto Clemente, I watched him on television back in the 60s. He was known as the bad ball hitter because Clemente could hit any in National League pitcher.
Yeah, he was awesome.
Good. Yep, he was good. And I still have his baseball cards, believe it or not. Collected those back then when you would just pay a dime, you'd get a package, a little wax packet, little wax packet. They'd have what, the eight to 10 cards and a stick of bubble gum.
Yeah.
And that was it. So he was good. He was great. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think he held during his career, he had 4 National League batting titles.
Right.
So he was alongside the Rod Carew from Panama. He was alongside Bobby Avila from Mexico, who won in '54, and a few other Latinos who had the statistics way beyond those of his competitors as such. Good man, great man, great loss.
The thing, another reason, Yesenia, why we wrote this book is because of the fact that because of people like Clemente, because of people like Tony Perez, because of people like Rod Carew, a lot of people in the United States believe that no Latino plays football. Believe me, you've got hundreds, thousands of Mexican American young men in the state of Texas, all over the state, playing football. Football is the sport here. There's some states that, well, this is a baseball state. Indiana's a basketball state. North Carolina's a basketball state. Texas, we live and breathe football, especially in the smaller cities like Lubbock. San Antonio is obviously a major metropolitan area, but they still love their football there. But in a place like Lubbock, out in West Texas, this is our lifeblood, and to have Mexican Americans or other Latinos playing football and being successful, like Bobby Cavazos here at Texas Tech in 1953, it really shatters the myth that, I've written about Bobby Cavazos. Like I said, the younger brother of a gentleman who was president of this university from 1980 to 1988. Bobby Cavazos in 1953 helped lead Texas Tech to one of the best seasons that we've ever had at this university. 11-1. We won the Gator Bowl, and shortly thereafter, Texas Tech achieved something that we had hoped for many years, which was we played in a little conference que se llamaba the Border Conference. Nobody cared about the Border Conference. We wanted to play with the big boys, the Southwest Conference, Texas A&M, University of Texas. Bobby Cavazos, a Mexican American from the King Ranch in Kingsville, Texas, his success helped to move this university into the Southwest Conference. And nobody talks about that. So that's part of what we cover. That's part of what we cover.
And Mexicanos have or Latinos have a tendency to also dispel the myth, the athletic myths that surround them. Years ago, for a while there, you were hearing that, well, if the Latino makes it, referring to the Mexicano, if he makes it into the pros rank, he's either a kicker that he got from learning to play soccer, or he's a huge offensive lineman, which is basically some characterizations that just don't have much, that are basically coming from an Anglo or basically almost unconscious description of not only ability but also of the individual himself. Okay? The majority of Latinos in the history that we did that began in 1927 were quarterbacks. And in the early 1940s and 50s, they were all running backs.
Mm-hmm.
They wound up leading the NFL. We have one that here's a fact that stands above all others. There's one Latino. His name was Ricardo Jose Cáceres. When I went looking to do research, for he had played with the Chicago Bears. When asked about him, and I pronounced his name correctly, phonetically correctly, Cáceres, and they said, well, there was no one here by that name. He said, can you spell it? So I said, oh, you're talking about Casares. Yeah, oh, he was great. He went on and on and on and on and on. And sure enough, I got a chance to speak with him. He told me my real name is Ricardo Jose Cáceres.
Yeah.
But he said, once I got into, he was in Florida, college in Florida, and his football play in college was interrupted because he got drafted during the Korean War. Okay? But he returned. The Chicago Bears had drafted him in 1956. Ricardo Jose became the first Latino NFL running back to win a rushing title in 1956. That's one hell of a trivia question there.
Yeah.
He just died a few years ago. And one of the last times that I talked to him on the telephone, he was telling me, let's see if I can avoid the lump in my throat. He was telling me that I'm getting up in my years and so forth, but when I left, I love football so much, but when I left it, he's got two grandsons named just like him, Ricardo Jose Cáceres. Okay? And he said, well, there's some, I wish I could live a little longer because there's something I haven't yet to do in professional football. Well, of course, he was far from it already, but he told me that he wished he could live a little while longer so he can get that done. But he never told me what it was.
Mm.
So I'm still left wondering what that was. But he was one hell of a person. He grew up pretty rough in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, in Tampa.
It was a real tough neighborhood, and that's what he served in the army, and then a fellow player, he was a tight end. I forget. He was also the coach of the Chicago Bears. Referred to him as the toughest person he had ever met in his entire life.
Yeah. And you know what? Another angle to this, Yesenia, is there are several Latino players that people don't realize are Latino players. Yeah. Let me give you an example. Jim Plunkett, the great quarterback from Stanford,
Yeah.
a Latino who won the Heisman Trophy. Jim Plunkett is half Mexican, is half Mexican American, and my wife and I just wrote a kid's book on another Mexican American that a lot of people don't realize is Mexican American, and that's Tony Romo, the great quarterback. And again, I hope there aren't too many Giant fans there that I'm going to insult, but is Tony Romo, the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Tony Romo's grandfather came from Mexico to Texas during World War II as an 11-year-old. He wound up living in Texas for a little while. But basically, Mario had been saying about Mexican Americans moving into the Midwest. The Romo family, their story is out of Wisconsin. Not exactly the first place you assume that there's going to be a lot of Mexicanos or Mexican Americans. But who do you think was working the sugar beet fields in Wisconsin? Who do you think was working in the canning industry in Wisconsin? Who do you think was picking cherries in Michigan? These are the people that were there. And the Romos, that's where they're from. Tony Romo was raised in a little town in Wisconsin. So you've got people like Ted Hendricks, who was Guatemalteco. You have several Latinos who come from these different backgrounds. They have non-Hispanic surnames. And I mean, Romo could be Italiano, obviously, as well. But that's what everybody thought Tony Romo was. Everybody thought Tony Romo was Italian. But he made it a point to point out that I'm Mexican. I come from a family that came to the United States from Mexico in the 1940s. So I mean, again, all of this stuff I think ties in with the theme of your presentation, the theme of your exhibit, which is, what does sport do for the community? It's not just about the athlete himself or herself. It's, what does this mean to the community? And more importantly, I would argue, what does that do to the way that we are perceived by the broader population? What's the old saying? There's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. Well, when we go to, and I mean, obviously in football, they use military terms. When we go to battle in football on the gridiron, the guy that's next to me who's wearing the same uniform, it doesn't matter to me whether he's African American, whether he's Cuban, Puerto Rican, Mexicano, whatever. What matters is we got to do X so that we can win. And I would argue, and Mario and I argue in our book and in some of the other stuff that we've done, that this helps to break down these stereotypes and these notions that people have about, quote, limitations, both intellectual and physical, of Latinos in this case.
Yeah.
Football's a pretty darn complicated sport. Yeah. You can't be a dummy and play. Everybody thinks that football players are all, brawn, and they have to be. I've had several football players from Texas Tech here in my office. I can tell you, I'm 6'3". These guys make me look. The starting, one of the starting offensive linemen for the Dallas Cowboys now, Terrence Steele, was in my office a few years ago, and I looked this kid up and I went, "Holy smokes, man! You are one big dude." He's like 6'7", 6'8". But these guys have to have intellectual capability because it is such a complicated sport. And Mario, if I could just jump in and say one more thing. One of the early arguments here in Texas in particular about Mexicans can't play football is because, quote, they weren't smart enough. Football, as I'm sure a lot of people know, football began in the Ivy League, began at Yale, began at Harvard, began at Princeton, began at Rutgers. And it was a game that was connected to the idea of the industrialization process of the United States. And it's a game that's very much like an industrial process. You have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to work together. It's kind of like an assembly line to be able to make things happen. Well, obviously, Latinos Mexicans, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, those people aren't smart enough to do this kind of stuff. So here in Texas, the argument was Mexicans can't play football because, first of all, they're not smart enough. Secondly, tying in with some of the stuff that Mario was saying, they're just not tough enough. They're not brave enough. They're not. Well, this book goes through the process of showing you in Texas, in California, and in other parts of the country, how many of these young men, challenge those stereotypical assumptions.
And a footnote to the Tony Romo story. Yeah, he came from a migrant family, and if you're from South Texas, in this area here in the Southwest, we were going up to Wisconsin to pick the betabel, which is a sugar beet, and then we were going to the Midwest to do some other stuff. That was a yearly thing until such time things settled. The war ended, and jobs are now becoming available and that sort of stuff. See, Romo, David Flores from the San Antonio Express News several years back, and he shared this information with me, and I got a chance I used it in the book. Romo was very close to his maternal grandmother, Mexicana.
Yeah.
Didn't speak any English. Okay, he would call her.
Don't get choked up, Mario.
Before every game to let her know in his broken Spanish that he was going to play, and he would hope they were going to win, and he was going to do the best for her and that sort of stuff. Those are I guess that's the subject that he shared with her when he called her to let her know he's going to be okay, but we were going to play tonight and he was going to win. Yeah. He did that with her his entire 4 years in college, and then I think his first 4 or 5 years with the Dallas Cowboys, and then she passed away. That's the community, and you can almost hear his grandmother say, "Mi hijo and mi yerno," and so forth, and this and that, y que lo cuide Dios, and so forth. That's the return to the community.
Yeah. And Yesenia, do you have any other questions? Because I mean, we just sort of went off on tangents here, and we don't want to not answer your questions if you have specific ones.
Not a problem. I was letting you spill off because everything you were saying was right in tune with what I mentioned before, right in tune with our exhibit, with our theme, que la comunidad es muy importante, for sure. So I did want to ask, basically, can you describe, you mentioned already some of the barriers that Latinos face, right, in entering sports, discrimination, racism, public financial, but could you describe specifically what some of those barriers are that we as Latinos face, say, going into American football?
Yeah. Did you get that, Mario?
Barely.
What are some of the barriers that these individuals face going into play American football?
Well,
and the biggest barriers that existed in the past, and I think Mario can talk a lot about this. I think to a certain extent the barriers continue today. That is, in the 1920s and 1930s here in Texas, specifically here in Texas, it was very, very, very difficult for a Mexican American a young person, to graduate from high school, in part because of the way that they were treated in the school systems. That was part of it. Another aspect of this was simply the fact that their families needed the income. And you know what Mario was telling you, Yesenia, about what's called the big swing, which is you go from South Texas, you go through different parts of Texas, you go all the way up to Wisconsin, you go to Minnesota, you go to Iowa, you go to Kansas, and you work sugar beets, cherries, potatoes, all those different things. How are these kids going to be able to finish high school? And then how were they going to be able to uh, uh, play sports given those circumstances that many of their, you know, it just reminded me of something. Mario mentioned the 1961 Donna Redskins. I've written about them. The quarterback of the Donna Redskins, his name is Luz Pedraza. I'm assuming he's still alive. I haven't spoken to him in many years. But Luz Pedraza, the quarterback of that team, this going from the summer of 61 into the fall of 61. In other words, going from the summer to begin the football season in 61 when Donna won the state championship. His family actually left him behind in Donna so that he could train and he could stay and lift weights and work out with his cop while they did the swing. Well, they went to work. That was the kind of effort that a lot of these families had to put up with because it was simply very, very rare. The percentages were infinitesimally small of Mexican Americans in the 30s and 20s, 30s, and 40s here in Texas who graduated from high school. And Mario, why don't you sort of like pick up on that?
Well, in relation to that was I'll give you the example of the school I went to. Okay, well, let me give you a footnote first of all. The Civil Rights Act was passed. The second Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Okay. We were competing in the city of San Antonio, but we did not play any of the white schools. Okay. It wasn't until 1965 that we played the white schools in baseball and in football and so forth. I'll give you an example of we played the MacArthur Brahmas baseball. Big, tall white boys, thought they were pretty good and so forth. We beat them 11-4. Okay. I pitched that game. The game ended, and normally out of good sportsmanship, so forth, you go and you shake hands, you get up on, you walk, and shake hands, so on and so. They didn't even bother. So the white schools, when they were first made available to be put on schedules and play the what they so-called Mexican schools, they didn't even bother. If they lost, they would not shake hands. And if they did win, they always had something to say that they would whisper to the opponents as they walked by, shaking hands, that sort of stuff. That was the kind of stuff we were exposed to. This was in 1965. Okay, schools were separate. The Texas Constitution still has that provision for public schools, separate schools for Mexicans and whites. Okay, it hasn't changed much. Texas still is second only to Mississippi in terms of race relations. It's terrible. Okay, and if you ever watch any of the national news and they make reference to the to the politics here, they're not very good. It's kind of we're going back to times past as such, and that was it. See? And then things eventually started to straighten out a little bit, and then you could see the competition being a little more fair and a little more I should say it normalized eventually went into 1970s. But I was gone by then. I was overseas in 67, 68.
You know what, Yesenia, if I may, I will throw in another story that it's a different sport, and it's from a book by a colleague of mine named Ignacio Garcia, who teaches at BYU. And Ignacio and I have worked together on many things. Ignacio was raised in San Antonio, and he played at a school that was all Mexican American, and uh, he
Lanier,
Lanier,
Lanier.
and he wrote a book called, you'll love the title of this, When Mexicans Could Play Ball. It was about a championship basketball team from Lanier. And there's a story, I don't recall what year it was. This must have been like in the mid 30s, maybe late 30s. Lanier was playing a playoff game outside of San Antonio. I don't remember where it is, where it is. They show up early, and they show up at the gym of this school, and they're trying, the doors are locked, the doors are padlocked. And you've got this whole group of Mexican American kids who get off the bus, and they're trying to get into the gym, and they're padlocked. And this guy comes up to them with a shotgun in his hand, saying, who the heck are you people, and what the heck are you doing? And the coach of the Lanier team said, well, we're from Lanier, we're here to play. And the guy said, the response, we historians live for these stories, live for these quotes. And I apologize, I'm going to use a rough word here in just a second. I hope that the people don't mind. But when they say, well, we're the basketball team from Lanier High, we're here to play a playoff game. And the guy said, everybody knows that no goddamn Mexican plays basketball. They eventually worked it out. They went in, they played the game, and they won, which I'm sure didn't help matters. But that is the attitude of a lot of people. Again, and I'm glad that I can use the example of basketball, because a lot of what Mario and I write about in this book in football is happening in baseball, is happening in basketball, is happening in other sports and other aspects of life, as Mario indicated.
Yeah. The Lanier team, when Mexicans can play ball, that's a great book. The Lanier team, all Mexicans, short and very dark-skinned Mexicans, with one exception. Okay? And they won the state championship in 43 and in 45. Okay? But they also won 5 regional championships and 7 city championships.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that one team and I can't remember the coach's name for the life of me. He was good.
Yeah.
He was good. We also went up to El Paso later on and took
Right.
the baseball team to the state championship.
Yeah.
And those are the things, and that's the legacy.
Yeah.
The one Latinos, the conclusion is the Latinos are human beings just like everybody else, whether another person wants to believe that or not. You have 2 eyes, a nose, 2 ears, and so forth, 2 hands and 2 feet. Okay?
You know what?
Unfortunately, there's those among us who still don't have those humane inclinations, I guess, for the lack of a better term. Okay? And they still believe, they do it both consciously and unconsciously, they still believe that they cannot be good athletes. Is it very simply, given the opportunity and normalizing the situation, they can be just as good as anybody else. I've come to that conclusion from all the research and all the interviews and the talks I've done, the information that I found both written, and then the interview information has been great. Sometimes initially Mexicanos do not want to share some bad things that have happened to them over their lives until they get comfortable and they know that you're not going to betray them by them sharing the information with you. Okay? But you're going to treat it, to educate others or to establish a history that one did not exist. So that's another goal of mine is that I want to write a history that needs to be written because there's one there and no one wants to write it. Okay? That's for me is a challenge to go ahead and research and write it up, but write it up truthfully and factually. Okay? And there's lessons to be learned from that. Okay?
And
If people take the time to do that.
if I may, one other aspect that I wanted to share with you is this, and there's a gentleman by the name of Juan Castillo, who is one of my favorite stories in the book. Juan Castillo is from a little fishing town here in Texas called Port Isabel.
Yeah,
His father was killed in a shrimp boat accident when he was like 9 or 10. His mom had to raise the family by herself. His mom worked in hotels as a cleaning lady for many years. Juan Castillo went and played football at Port Isabel, got his high school diploma, eventually got to play at a school called Texas A&M Kingsville, which is actually a small school, but it's a major power among small schools. Completed his degree, finished his did never. I think he actually had a chance to play in the old USFL for a little time, but eventually he wound up coaching. And Juan Castillo told me a story that I have to share with, and I think will resonate with a lot of what the people who are watching or the people who are there will get a kick out of. Is this: his first job was with the Philadelphia Eagles, and basically he was breaking down film for the offense for the Philadelphia Eagles. The guy that he worked for is a guy that most people who are familiar with the National Football League know, John Gruden. John Gruden has a legendary reputation when he was in the league of being a fanatic as far as work. This guy would work 20 hours a day. Juan Castillo knew that he was going to work for John Gruden. So he asked Gruden, okay, what time do you get here? And Gruden says, well, I get here at 4 o'clock in the morning to start breaking down film. And Juan Castillo slept in his car, and he would get there at 3:30 to beat John Gruden to the office. And here's the quote that John Castillo, God bless him, gave me. It's in the book. And he said, it took a Mexican to outwork John Gruden. And that, again, we just live for those quotes. But by the way, I got to share one more quote with you guys. The team that Mario was mentioning, the 61 Donna Redskins. I interviewed one of the guys who played on that team, and he told me this story in like 2001, 2002. He was retired from the Postal Service. I think he lived in San Antonio, Mario, if I remember correctly. And he went back to Donna to visit family and all that. And he said that he was in the post office and he was in line. And this old Mexican American lady recognized him and said, hey, aren't you one of, I don't remember his name. He said, well, aren't you one of the boys who play for, and he said, yes, I am. And so she told her husband, and her husband said, this was one of the guys from the 61 team que le enseñé, cuando le enseñamos a los gringos que nosotros los mexicanos sabíamos jugar fútbol también, that we Mexicans could also play football. We live for those quotes. It doesn't get, and I think it really wraps all the stuff that you guys are trying to present in this presentation. What does it goes beyond what happens on the football field. It goes beyond the final score. It goes beyond championships. It is, what does this mean to the people that I come from? What does it demonstrate?
In essence of trying to find a little time, I wanted to discuss a little bit about um, you've given examples of Latinos surely at the high school level, the collegiate level football, um, but unlike, of course, the MLB and the NBA, we just simply are not represented in the NFL. And I wanted to just have a little talk about why that is so.
Okay. Yeah. My,
The
go ahead.
it, the NFL is at the top level of competition. Okay? There's a lot of things, there's a lot of Mexicanos that are a lot of Latinos. Please excuse my reference to the constant reference to Mexicanos. I guess because I'm one, and it always seems to come out first. But I'm referring to Latinos as a whole. The only difference between the Latinos is how they spell their ethnic group. That's it. Other than that, we're very much alike. Same values and same outlooks and perspective, and also many experience very similar experiences. The NFL, the draft, there's something wrong there. I can tell you a story of the Professional Pro Football Hall of Fame. There was a recent incident there, not an incident, but a situation where, get this, Latinos, for some reason or another, regardless of how good you are, always seem to fall by the wayside. Whenever decisions are made in offices, like at the NFL or the Pro Football Hall of Fame regarding inductions and those kinds of things, for some reason or another, as good as they may be, and have all the statistics and have all the numbers and so forth, for some reason or another, they're always at the bottom of the list. Okay? That I can only speculate on the reasons why that's the case. Okay? The Anthony Munoz, Hall of Famer. Okay? Without a doubt, the biggest Mexican you've ever seen. He was 6'7", 6'8", almost weighed 300 pounds, and could run the 40 meters in less than 6 seconds. No, less than 7 seconds. Okay, he was good, but he was also very timid. He was growing up. He grew up in a single family, in a single parent family, and he was very religious, so forth. But he made the cut right away, as opposed to, say, for example, Flores. Okay? I was involved in some situations there where they recognized Flores as a top flight, not only player, but also coach.
Yeah.
Okay? He's only one of 6 coaches that have more than 2 Super Bowl wins as a head coach. Okay? But for some reason or another, he always seemed in the discussions where all the supposedly minds get together and decide what they're going to do next, or they have some procedures or protocols they have to follow. He was always set aside. Okay? There was one sports writer, a very famous one, for some reason or another, didn't have anything good to say about Flores, and he got questioned quite a bit in the committees and in public discussions and so forth, but he never withdrew. He stuck to his guns. Okay. Well, to give you an idea, this is, I guess, perseverance is a key word here.
Yeah.
Flores was nominated nominated for induction in the Pro Football Fame over 20 times. And it wasn't until the very end that he, I think, in the one period, he was able to make, because they voted on him 3 times.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the very end until someone sent in a letter questioning the procedures, the protocols, and the mindsets of the sports writers, of all the sports writers, there was 46 of them. Only 1 Latino, 1 black, and 1 female. The rest were all good old white, good teeth, white men that didn't care much about anything other than making their $150,000 a year. Okay? There was no humanity in them based on, in my opinion, and so forth. There is one person wrote a letter to the commissioner and some of the other officers in the NFL and the Pro Football Hall of Fame director, and only then. And get this, the letter was 11 pages long, describing discrepancies and not following the procedures and the rules and regulations they made pertaining to what they had to consider to vote and individually. And eventually they got done. And then when things calm down and so forth, you didn't see Flores for 2 years, and then all of a sudden he gets inducted.
Yeah.
Yep.
And,
So it's not a mystery. It's quite clear. But in those circles, you cannot actually go out and attack anybody or ask some very hard questions, because the first thing you're going to do is they're going to censor you. Okay?
and
So the problem therein lies that there is still something wrong in the mentality of those in power on why they cannot look at everybody as a human being with strengths and weaknesses. And
and
the only and the key there with Mexicanos is being able to get the opportunity to prove that they are top flight athletes.
and I can go at this question, Yesenia, from the other end. You know, Mario's talking about Tom Flores' long career in the National Football League. I can talk a little bit now. I guess I can bring in the idea of high school and why there's maybe 3% of the football players at the collegiate level, all divisions, are Latino. Why is that? We're 19, 20% of the population. You would think that there would be more. And I can give you an example from here in Texas. There is, you know, as I said, that football is a religion here in Texas. The Bible of football in Texas is a magazine called Dave Campbell's Texas Football. This thing comes out every year. How long has it been published? Might have since like the 60s, right? Something like that. Yeah.
But actually, it started in '74, I believe.
Okay. All right.
And
This thing is the Bible of, you know, and believe me, I've got a copy of every single year for the last 25 years that I've been here. I've been living in Texas. All right. So I mean, this thing is like gold. What it contains is information on all the professional teams, all the college teams, but most important to me is every single high school football team is talked about in that publication. Okay, you have communities in this state that are overwhelmingly Mexican American. El Paso, Laredo, the Rio Grande Valley, you know, McAllen, Harlingen, those cities. Dave Campbell at the start of every issue has people from different parts of the state, from Houston, from Dallas, from, you know, other parts of the state, and they argue back and forth. Where is the best football played in the state of Texas? There's never anybody from Laredo. There's never anybody from El Paso. There's never anybody from the Valley. Why? Because, quote, everybody knows Mexicans can't play football. So, you know, I'm working now with a colleague at Idaho State, and we're looking at the history of an event called the El Paso Showcase in El Paso, Texas. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get collegiate recruiters to come down to El Paso and look at predominantly Mexican American football players. And a lot of these young men don't wind up going to big schools like the University of Texas, Texas Tech, University of Michigan. But you know what? A lot of these young men are getting scholarships to go to Incarnate Word, which is a little Catholic school in San Antonio. They're getting scholarships to go to Texas A&M Kingsville. And maybe they're not going to make it to the NFL. Most likely they're not going to make it to the NFL. But you know what, Yesenia? They're going to get to play football at the collegiate level, and they're going to get education for free. And that is going to change the dynamic, the financial, the social, the political dynamic of their families. And frankly, to be honest with you, we write about a lot of guys who played professional football here. But I think that the most important thing that we do is we talk about how do we get more Latinos in Florida, in Texas, in California, in New Jersey, to be able to play high school football, to then be able to go, even if it's at a smaller school, to then be able to go to college and play college football and get a scholarship so that their families are not burdened with paying for their education. That's, I think, the key thing. That's I think the key thing. You know, many people in Newark might not be familiar with Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word is a Catholic school in San Antonio. Very good football program. They are they're FCS, which is Football
FCS,
Championship Subdivision, which is like you've got Division I, and then you've got FCS. Incarnate Word has a lot of kids who are Mexican American, who come from the Valley, who come from Laredo, who come from El Paso. We need to, Texas A&M Kingsville, same thing. Texas A&M Commerce. These are schools that maybe a lot of folks in the Northeast have never heard of, but these are schools that play lower division football. A lot of these kids are not going to, most of these kids aren't going to make it to the NFL. But you know what? I got a degree. I got a chance to go and get a college degree and continue to play football. That's wonderful. That's, to be honest with you, to me, that is even more important than the fact that this kid made it to the National Football League, and that all that stuff's important. But the most important thing is that 20 years from now, some of these young men are going to be there replacing Mario Longoria and myself as academicians, as teachers, as doctors, as lawyers, as professional people, because they could play football for Incarnate Word or Texas A&M Kingsville. You know, that's the key thing.
I appreciate that, and second that. It's just we could talk about this for another hour, but I have to be mindful of these people want to tour the exhibit.
Sure.
I'm just, but I just, as you were speaking, I'm thinking, and totally agree with you. It's really key that we do get this free education, but throughout the exhibit, we talk about and highlight, how important representation is.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, I'm not watching collegiate football, right? But I'm there any given Sunday, watching the NFL. And when I sit down with my son and he watching the NFL games, he's not seeing himself represented. And
Yeah.
so I think that's what's really key and important. And the hopes that, as time goes on, of course, that this improves, that we do see representation in the NFL, just like we see it in the MLB and everywhere in any other, major sport league. So I'm just gonna stop there and ask if you guys want to share any last thoughts, and check the lines to see if there are any questions in the feed.
Sure. Mario, why don't you go ahead?
Well, the journey, the research, and the finding out of things and so forth, oftentimes surprises, oftentimes, and at other times not surprises. But the key to the whole thing is, and I oftentimes have a tendency to lose sight of the fact is that you have, do not never negate your dreams. You just need to every now and then adjust them as such. When I want to go to this school, if I get a chance, I want to play football. Just the fact that you thought of giving it a chance meant that you're going to do very well academically, okay? Because that's where your emphasis is at. Okay? But there are exceptions. The thing is, the Latino should never shortchange himself in terms of
Yeah.
what he wants to do, either in athletics or academics.
Yep.
Just jump in there and do what you have to do.
Yep.
Okay? And it'll all, sooner or later, it'll all come together, and there'll come a time in that academic or that athletic life where you get these little epiphanies. You're saying, well, that wasn't hard after all. Okay? I'm here. It's a matter of how much you want it. And of course, you're always going to get support from your family and the friends that you have. Okay? That's the one very positive thing that Latinos have. Is not only family, but community support.
And
It's very
also,
important.
Ghana, you know, you need to, what we hope that this book and some of these stories will do is will inspire people. And yes, Yesenia, you're absolutely right. I would love to be able to see more Latinos in the National Football League. But to me, the fact that more recruiters are going to El Paso and the fact that more kids are getting a college education. And you know what? They're going to schools all over the country. It's not just here in Texas or California or Florida. They're going to schools in Kansas. They're going to schools in Iowa. They're going to schools in Minnesota. And maybe for the first time, some people in Duluth, Minnesota are seeing a Latino in a different light. Hey, this guy's pretty good. This guy can help us win football games. And let's be brutally honest. If you've got a university that is playing football, you want to win. You want your school to win, by God. And now all of a sudden we go back to that no atheists in the foxhole point that I brought up, which is I'd never met a Mexican American. I'd never met a Cubano. I'd never met a Boricua. Wow, this guy, to go back like to what Mario was saying, this guy is just another human being, just like me, another American. And he plays our sport and he's a teammate. And I might become friends with this guy. Breaking down barriers. To be honest with you, that's part of the reason why we use the term path breakers in this as the title of the book, because these guys, many of them, especially the old timers, did things that a lot of people in the majority population did not think that a Latino, be he Cuban, Puerto Rican, Mexican, whatever, could do. And I think really that's the key theme and the key takeaway of the book.
You.
Thank you.
That was a great note to end our discussion. I really appreciate both of you tuning in and joining us from Texas. And unfortunately, se van a perder la buena comida que tenemos aquí. So along with the exhibit. But
what are you guys having, Yesenia? What are you guys
some
having?
arroz amarillo con pernil, pollo, maduros, vegetales, and some empanadas.
Oh, Fred.
We're there.
Well,
We're there.
Thank you, guys.
we're there in spirit. Are there any questions?
I'm not hearing any, and I don't see any in the discussion.
Okay, great.
We are
Well,
good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, and my best to all of you. And it's always great to be able to hook up with my friend and colleague Mario. And thank you so much for having us.
And
Thank you very much, Yesenia. I really appreciate it.
We'll be sure to share with you so you can see the exhibit as well.
Thank you. All right. Good night. Good night, everybody.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.